I get it. And the people that didn't stick around, that did kind of like drive a stake through the ticker, I was asked before if I've forgiven them. And I think that's a really strange conversation, because it's like, no, like, you weren't there when I needed you most. So I don't have to forgive you. Like, I can look back and understand why. I get why. The boyfriend breakup thing is kind of like, would I do the same thing if I were in that situation? And I don't know the answer to that. I would like to think I would, but I don't know. I have never been faced with that from the other side of it. And for me personally, like, that would have to take into consideration, like, would this bring up a whole lot of PTSD that I don't know if I can handle? Like, would I be bedside and just have a meltdown and have to run them screaming out of the hospital? Like, I don't know. And so then to ask that of someone who also hasn't faced it before is unfair.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to another episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're joined by Edward Miskie. Edward, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure to have you on. Now, we always like to start off by getting to know the guests that we're speaking with. So we're going to start off by asking the very loaded question. Who is Edward Miskie?
I mean, what a loaded question. Do you want the 36 years of history version, or do you want where I'm at right now?
Whatever works for you.
Yeah,
sure. Okay, so we'll do a quick timeline. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I moved to New York when I was 18, like fresh out of high school, didn't go to college, just moved here because, Pennsylvania is what it is, and I needed to leave. And I moved here to originally pursue being like a pop rock singer, kind of doing the underground music scene. And that morphed itself into me doing the musical theater scene. And I've worked all over the country doing shows all over the place. And, I've been really fortunate to be able to do that. And, things kind of took a turn. I got cancer. I didn't have cancer. That I continued to perform around the country. And I've kind of snowballed that into creating a concert of my own that I got to create with my friend Dan Pardo, who's a great Broadway music director and arranger, and he's amazing and one of my oldest friends. And it's been a weird couple years. 2020 hit and everything fell apart, and we're still trying to put our brains back together, I think. And that's kind of where I'm at now. Like hitting the 10-year cancer survivor anniversary last year was kind of like, okay, that puts some perspective on the last couple years in and of itself. And decided to go with the book. And I like dogs and cats, and I like food. I just went to Europe for the first time last year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was great. I'd never been. It was just kind of it's kind of a long story, but I was supposed to be on the national tour of Chicago, and then at the last minute, I still don't know why, I was replaced, and by a friend. Thank God, it was somebody I liked. And I just kind of like had this moment where I was like, I need to get out of here. And so I got on a plane. I didn't have a plan, and I just went to London and Paris and like bopped around for a little bit.
Sounds good. Well, okay, so it sounds like, again, if I'm getting the timelines right, based on what you said, you moved to New York, and then about 8 years into your time working in the theater scene, that's when you found out that you had the cancer diagnosis, or maybe a little bit before that.
Yeah, just about that. It was like 7 or 8 years. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So I was doing a show in Reno, Nevada. I was doing Hairspray. I don't know if you're familiar. I don't know how versed in musical theater you are, but it was Hairspray.
Yeah.
And if you're familiar with the movie, I was playing the James Marsden character. And I just had this little lump under my arm that kind of was inconsequential to start. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until, like at the end of that 5-month contract, it was like the size of a grapefruit. And it was like very visible. Like you could see it. I had to have my costume taken out once or twice because it kept stretching the side of it out. It was changing shape. I could like notice bigger growth, and I had stretch marks on my side because it kept getting bigger and bigger. And by the time I left that contract and went back to New York, my doctor was like, biopsy now. And that's kind of how it all started.
Wow. So the whole time as this growth was happening, like what were you thinking it was?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, like, I was a stupid 25-year-old kid, you know? Like, I was like,
It's
oh, who knows?
nothing.
I was like, it's fine. It's like, whatever. You know, and I remember like very much towards the end of the contract, just kind of being like, well, I guess I'm going to have this thing hacked out of my arm now. And the people that I was doing the show with were very much like, yeah, you should maybe get that looked at, because it was ugly. I mean, it was not nice to look at, and everybody kind of knew that something was going on. But you know, after I got back and got it taken care of, I kind of went dark. I went under the radar. I didn't tell anybody. It was like close friends and family only. And I submerged a year later, and I was like, so just so you know, I've spent the last year dying. I'm back.
Oh man.
So you went and got the biopsy, or your doctor told you need to get a biopsy, and you get those results back. You know, I've been in the office with my mom when she got results like that, and thank goodness, you know, she's cancer free as well. But like in that moment, it's almost like you really need almost one or two people extra in the room just to take in all this information, right? So were you by yourself? Did you have somebody that went with you?
To be honest with you, I don't remember the day that I got the call that it was in fact cancer. I think I knew, I'm trying to remember the chronology here. If they like quick ran the biopsy while I was there and they kept me there, or if they called me later, I truthfully don't remember. I don't think I was by myself at that point. I mean, I'm sorry. I do believe I was by myself at that point. It wasn't until a couple of the other like pre-treatment tests started happening that my parents started to come up to the city to be with me. So I had to have like heart scans done and preliminary blood work done to make sure I was healthy enough to take chemo. But like I was 25 and in the best shape of my life. So like, yes, I could. And, you know, there was insurance issues, and we got into a fight with like finance at the hospital because they wouldn't let me do the appointment unless I paid outright. But my insurance was it was like a whole mess.
Man.
And, I think the moment that you're talking about, like with your mom, like having someone there, like that didn't hit for me until the day I checked into the hospital.
Okay.
It didn't really feel real because like I'd been living with this thing for months, and I was like, this is
Right.
like, okay, whatever. But it wasn't until I had packed a bag and met my mom at the hospital, and we went in to check in and filled out all the paperwork. It wasn't a very good hospital. They didn't tell me what to expect that day. I had no game plan. So I showed up just thinking like, I'm going to go to a room, and then they're going to start like, you know, they're going to hook me up to a hose and like pump me full of chemo and best wishes, I guess. But the reality is that, you know, I had to have a port put in, and no one told me that. So I'm losing my mind in this holding room. Like while I'm putting on this hospital gown, I'm having a complete and utter meltdown. Like my body is coming out of my body. And, you know, they're like, you know, we're going to go off to surgery. And I was like, surgery? What for? And they were like, oh, well, you know, we need to put a port in, and it goes into your chest and it hooks up through your neck. And like, I'm like, what are you talking about? So that was the moment where I just had a complete collapse. And thankfully, like my mom has worked in the medical field her whole life. And, you know, she has mixed chemo before and is very in like with it when it comes to that. So she was kind of there to field questions and errors, and there were errors, and, you know, just kind of absorb it for me when I couldn't.
And it's so important to have a support person, you know, especially going through all the stages, right? And just you maybe think you're prepared until something like that comes up, and it's like, oh, okay, I didn't know that this was going to happen. And then there comes that like nervousness, like you said, anxiety, however that can be for the patient, right?
Yeah, well, and it just was so wild. I mean, like, do you remember? I don't want to age either of you or myself, but like there used to be a show, and I'll lead with that, on Nickelodeon called The Secret World of Alex Mack. And
Okay.
she like, okay, so you're either much younger than me or much older than me, and I'm not going to guess which.
or we just haven't
Or
watched
we just haven't watched. But it was this show about a girl who grew up near a power plant that had a radioactive meltdown, and she could turn herself into this little puddle of like chemicals and like slide around town, and like that's how she got around. And that is kind of how she would like explode and melt, and that's kind of how I felt in that moment, where like things started to really go to south in my head of like, this is real, I'm checking in here, this is really bad, and like I feel like there's no coming out of this. Like, have I seen my apartment for the last time? And like I felt like I exploded and just melted into this little radioactive puddle and kind of like slithered around the hospital for a while. But yeah, I mean the surgery was easy, it was fine, it was you know, I was under, but it was only for a little bit, and it was just a weird day, you know. Bye life, hello hospital, I get to live here now. Like it was very odd.
Now, the actual cancer that you had, so my understanding was that it was a pretty rare form of cancer too.
Yeah, it's called rare enlarged B-cell Burkitt's like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I do not fit any demographic that it fits into. And so it was this anomaly as to why I had it. And there wasn't a whole lot of literature on it. The hospital that I was at was very honest with me, because I asked them to be, that they kind of didn't really know what they were doing. And they were just kind of following previous protocols of like maybe similar things. And it wasn't until I left that hospital for a second opinion that I was correctly diagnosed, which is where the B-cell part of it came in, and like course corrected on my protocol. But going into it, like they didn't have much to go off of. And so it was like, you know, I had this moment where I was like, ugh, of course this would happen to me. Like, of course, if something like this was going to happen to me, it would be like, I get to be the special one in like the kind of way that you don't want to be special.
You don't want to be
like, I'm totally happy not being special in this circumstance. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how that went down. And it was wild. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of literature around it. And I think there were maybe like 1,200 cases of it worldwide reported at all during that time, and they were all, I don't know, 20 years younger than me and not on this continent. So it was very strange as to why I had this. It was weird.
And so, okay, so I guess that kind of explains it, but the original diagnosis was incorrect.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they kind of left a few parts out there. But you know, that this is one thing I kind of always tell people with any kind of like grave disease. I mean, like cancer being a big one, obviously, but you know, go to a hospital that is a specialist hospital, not one that has like a wing. Because I was at the one with the wing, and the wing had an education component to it. And so then you're like, I had these like college kids doing like my spinal like taps for chemo, and they couldn't do it right, and it ended up like leaving me laid out flat on my back for 18 days straight because I couldn't sit up. And that had a whole, you know, multitude of other issues as well. But you know, I always say, like, find a hospital that only does that thing all day, every day, all the time, and go there. Do not waste your time with like, you know, general hospital. Like, no, you don't want to do that.
No. So you had said you had just finished up your stretch of doing hairspray. How, after finding out this information, what did you think you were going to be doing next prior to finding out you had cancer? And did you feel like, okay, nothing else is going to happen right now, I don't know what's gonna, you know, what my future is going to look like?
So I kind of knew that something was going to have to happen. So in my head, I was like, I'll just take like December and January off. And then once February hits, like that's when things will start coming in again. And that's kind of exactly what happened, except for I couldn't do any of it because I was like 3 rounds of chemo in, and looked like a tortoise. So like I had theaters calling me and asking me if I was available for the summer or if I was interested in doing their seasons. I had a film call me, I had a commercial call me, and I had to say no to all of it. And the one that hurt the most was the theater, because it was a place that I've always wanted to work at. And they called me and asked me if I was available for the whole summer. And I said I wasn't, unfortunately, and I was so sorry. And they're like, "Oh, we figured that you were booked already. Okay, thank you." And it was like, like I'm kind of booked, but I'm like booked at a hospital, and I didn't really want to tell them that.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part, when dealing with these things. Obviously, this kind of stuff comes and it's not planned. We know that, right? And just the way that like we have one thought in regards to how even like the next 6 months to a year and 5 years down the line are going to go. And then something like a major illness comes up, right? And obviously get derailed and try to somewhat get back on.
Yeah, I mean, like what was I supposed to do? Like you think that you're, especially when you're younger, you're in your 20s and you're like revving and raring to go, and you just have this idea of what you think your life is going to be like, and then something like this comes along, and you like the thing is like, yes, this something like this comes along and everything kind of goes away, but I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself, but I was like clawing tooth and nail to try and feel normal and have some semblance of normalcy, or what I recognized as who I was during this period of time. So, excuse me, I like started creative writing. I started my own company. It was an online magazine for men over 6'4", and like talking about like clothing and lifestyle, and I don't fit into an airplane, like stuff like that. And it was very fun, but it was just something to distract me from what was going on during that time, because I couldn't take the contracts, and I very seriously considered taking one. One was in Florida, and my oncologist was just kind of like, that you have to put that behind you now. And it just like ripped it out of my actual chest. It was so bad. So bad.
So the one thing that you mentioned there, there's a few things that stood out, but so you're at least 6'4".
I am 6'4", yes.
You are 6'4". Okay.
I am a monster with a rib cage.
So, okay. Now, and just thinking, so I just kind of want to shift gears for a second here. Just in terms of your career, has that been something that's been a barrier, or has that helped you get certain roles?
It's so hard to say. I have my guesses, but there's really no way of pinpointing it. There's so few guys in theater right now that are that tall, and in some cases it helps you, in some cases it doesn't. It really just, there's so many factors that go into casting a show, and height certainly depends on it. But if you're cast first, and then they're going to cast the leading lady around you, and then it works for your benefit. But if she's already cast and she's 5'2", and you're almost a foot and a half taller than her, then like maybe it works against you. So yeah. So like it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. So it really just kind of it depends on who's doing the casting and who gets cast first. And there's so many components into it that I tried not to let it get into my head that way. It certainly did in the beginning. It was like, oh, like there's one guy, Cheyenne Jackson, who's like about my height. If not exactly my height. And he did a bunch of Broadway and then left for LA. And I was like, okay, well, he's gone. So there's at least room for one more person who's 6'4".
All right. Now that I got that out of the way, because it was going to bother me if I didn't ask. So I was kind of curious, but yeah. All right. So kind of want to focus on the time that you were actually going through the treatment. Can you just kind of walk us through that and what that's like? Because again, for somebody who found this episode because of the title, they're probably going through it, or maybe just getting started down that path. So just if you wouldn't mind sharing some of what you experienced.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was all hard. I mean, we tried to make it as much fun as possible, right? Like, and I know that probably sounds really counterintuitive when you're like, cancer, make it fun. But we did. We tried to like friends, close friends, the people in the inner circle, and like my family and whatnot, there was always someone in my hospital room, always. Like I slept there alone, but otherwise, like my dad was there, my mom was there, friends were there. And then there's one story that I like to tell because it just makes me chuckle. Because I was not kind to get this accomplished, but it was worth it in the end, and I apologize. But it was right before my stem cell transplant, and my friends were in my hospital room, like hanging out with me, and there was like a very small chance that I wouldn't live through the stem cell transplant. And they have to tell you that, and statistically speaking, like you don't want to hear that, but here we are. And my friends came by, and I was like, let's just order pizza from the hospital. Like they have a whole kitchen. The food at that particular one at Sloan Kettering was great, and I was like, cool, we'll order pizza. Okay, what could go wrong? And I called down to the kitchen, and I asked them for 4 pizzas because they were like little ones, and it had like 5 friends there. And they said that they could only deliver 1 pizza per room. And I just was like, I might not get out of here alive. Send the pizza. And they did. And it was a lot of fun. And so like, and I called down later and I was like, I'm sorry, I was mean, but it was,
I survived.
I survived. I got what I'm alive. Thank you. It was your doing. It was the pizza. But but like, I mean, everything about cancer is terrible. So you have to do stuff like that, right? Like chemo's not fun. You feel terrible. I didn't throw up a whole lot. I definitely happened, but you see like in movies and TV, like everybody's bald and skinny and sick and they can't do anything and whatever. And that's not always 100% true. And if it is, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And one thing I like to remind people when I talk about this kind of thing is that you really are treated like you've stopped being a human and you are now a patient. And the difference is bedside manner. They don't treat you badly, but they kind of treat you like, oh, hello, how are you feeling? Here's your chart. Your numbers are good. All right, we're going to take your vitals and have a good night. I hope you feel better. I'll see you later. Which there's nothing wrong with, but you're negating the fact that, like I had a boyfriend at the time who broke up with me, and like I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it because I was in the middle of chemo. Like, what did my doctor care, and I had a friend who was one of my closest friends that when I told them that I had cancer, I never spoke to them again. Like they ghosted. I still haven't talked to them. Like, they haven't reached out. So, these little nuancy things that you don't really think of when you're becoming a full-time patient, like professional patient, those are the hard things to deal with. And it's a very strange, it's really hard to articulate. The best way that I've been able to over the years has just kind of been like, these people are not mentally or emotionally equipped to be able to be there to support you. And in the end, like, even though it hurts at that time, in the end, you're better off without them. And I am like, I don't miss any of those people. Like most of the time I forget that they exist. I'd be lying if I say they weren't living a little rent free in my head right now as I'm doing these like talks with people, but, and like revisiting those moments and be like, oh, curses you. But it's a strange ride. It's never good news. And when you get good news, it's usually followed up with some bad news. And so while you're in that process, whatever your process is, whether it just be chemo, whether it's radiation, whether it's both, whether it's, now they have immunotherapy and CAR T cell therapy and all this other stuff. You have to make your own moments, like you're still alive, you're still a person, you're still going to remember these things and they're going to affect you forever. Like, I'm over 10 years out now. And, this time, 2012, I was being inundated with radiation. So like, those things will stick with you. And so you have to find bright spots. And if you can't find them, you have to make them. Like when I had a head shaving party and people brought pot brownies and it didn't go well because I'd never had them before. And so I had 3 of them and evidently that's too many. I couldn't walk. It was a whole thing. But, you make these little moments that make it bearable to have to, like, you bookend it with these trips to the hospital that you don't want to go to. And, listening to your doctor yammer on about stuff you don't really understand, which is also what like you were saying for your mom, like having someone there to advocate for you and listen to you and absorb for you. And because all you're hearing is like the teacher from Charlie Brown that's like, "Mah, mah, 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 mah," like that's all you hear after a while, because you just can't, like, chemo brain sets in and you're like, are you speaking English? I don't understand what you're saying. So it's a wild ride, and it really is just kind of about finding those moments with people around you that you care about, that love you, that make it worth, well, there's a lot more that make it worth getting through, but it makes it bearable while it's happening.
And I think just going back to, some people don't always know how to react. It's almost like grief too, right? Like you hear sometimes, oh, I never heard from so-and-so. And it's just like that awkward, like some people just don't know how to act. They don't know what to say. And then they sometimes think, well, if I just don't do anything, that's going to make it better. But obviously that's not the case. But then having those people that do stick by and support, obviously that was definitely something that was beneficial to you then, right?
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that's also an older generation thing too that gets taught. Like my grandmother, she's 97 and she will not go to funerals. It doesn't matter whose it is, she's not going. And she's always been that way. It's not just because she's 97. She's never done. I'm surprised she went to my grandfather's funeral, to be honest. Like if I can't speak for her, and I've never had this conversation with her, but yeah, I mean, if that's because she's not equipped to or doesn't want to face that, then like I get it. And the people that didn't stick around, that did kind of like drive a stake through the ticker, I was asked before if I've forgiven them, and I think that's a really strange conversation, because it's like, no, like you weren't there when I needed you most, so I don't have to forgive you. Like I can look back and understand why. I get why. The boyfriend breakup thing is kind of like, would I do the same thing if I were in that situation? And I don't know the answer to that. I would like to think I would, but I don't know. I have never been faced with that from the other side of it. And for me personally, like that would have to take into consideration, like, would this bring up a whole lot of PTSD that I don't know if I can handle? Like, would I be bedside and just have a meltdown and have to run them screaming out of the hospital? Like, I don't know. And so then to ask that of someone who also hasn't faced it before is unfair. And so, was I unfair to those people when those situations happened? Yes. Maybe, ? Shoulder shrug. But at the same time, they were also. So are we even? Is it a moot point? Sure. Like I'm so apathetic about it now that I kind of don't care. I just find it interesting to talk about, because it is something that, like, if you had to think about it, if you were faced with someone like if either of you were placed in that situation, God forbid, like, would the other one be strong enough to stay? And you don't know the answer. And like, of course, like it's gets complicated when there's marriages and kids and other things involved, and there's responsibilities and obligations, but there still is that weird shred of like, but would I? Because it's scary. It's very scary, and like insurmountably scary. And me, from where I sit, wouldn't blame the other person. It would hurt, and it did hurt, but I would get it.
Right.
Now, for all of those who didn't stick around, it sounds like there was still a pretty good support system, and there were people who did who were there for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, these are two people out of many. Right. Like I said, my hospital room was the fun room. Like all the nurses came to our room last so that they could hang out for a little bit. Like we were the party room on the cancer floor,
Oh man.
There were fun times, like even for the situations being as bad as they were. My friend Chris and we used to race around the floor with like my little chemo pole, and we would just like run down the hall and like slide on our socks, and like we're so obnoxious. I'm sure everyone on that floor was like, will you just die already? Like but like that's just how we coped, and like sorry to everyone else on the floor. But I lived.
Yep. I was just thinking, they're probably thinking either, like you said, die, or can you just get out of here? It's one or the
Yeah,
other.
like out the
Like,
window,
just
kid. Open it up.
get better and keep going.
Yeah. Well, and
Oh,
in
man.
situations like that, there are like you don't meet the other people on the floor really, because for the most
Yeah.
part, everyone's in isolation. I did meet one guy, and I'd be lying if I didn't think about him every so often, but he was about my age, and he like, right now, like after 2020, we're all used to seeing people wearing masks and other PPE stuff and whatnot. But unless you were in a hospital prior to that or traveled to Japan or something, like it wasn't something you saw on a regular basis. And I remember being on the floor, running around with my friend Chris, being obnoxious. And we kind of like went to get a drink, and this guy was in, not that there was a bar, it was like water. We got a Manhattan on the chemo floor. That's another story. I drank through chemo, and that's a whole different conversation, but my liver's made out of titanium. But we met this guy, and he lived upstate, and he was about my age, and he had leukemia. He wasn't specific. He just said he had leukemia, and he had kids, and one was a newborn, and like all the I remember very specifically, he told me that the doctors told him to stay away from his kids because like kids are gross, they're germ infested.
Yeah,
and like when you have chemo, like you don't have an immune system, like it's gone. So like the tiniest like wrong breath of air could kill you.
Yeah.
And so being around like little dirt bags, like it's not good. Like it's not recommended. And he just was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like I'm a new dad. And me being like, I'm so annoying sometimes, but I was just like, let me offer you some words of wisdom from someone who has never had a child or will ever have children ever. Here is what I have to say to you. And, like insert myself where I don't belong. But I was just like, you can't be a dad to them now so that you can be a dad to them later. Which isn't terrible advice, but it was still like, who are you? Like, get out of here.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he felt about it, but that was the last time I saw him, so I don't know what happened to him. But I do think about that guy sometimes, and like if he's running around with his kids now, because like they'd be teenagers and maybe one is in college, like I don't know, don't even know what his name was.
Well, you had some words of wisdom for him, I guess. That's
I guess, yeah. He was like, "Will this kid die already?" Never mind, I'll do it.
Oh man.
Now, after you finish treatment and we're cancer free, like, can you kind of walk us through that phase as well? Just finding out that everything went as planned and you were good to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of why I wrote the book I wrote, right? Like it was this thing where like, exactly what you said, cancer's over and you're good to go. Bye. And then, but like what you have to know and understand is like when you went in, you were a full different person. Like you had a life, you had a career, you had friends, you had relationships, you had a partner. Like maybe you had pets that aren't like I don't know how pets would tie into this, but you know what I mean? You had a whole shaped life.
Right.
And then you go in, and I was only in for 10 months, which is a very short period of time for cancer treatment. Like I was very lucky that I got out as fast as I did. But that's gone. Like the theater stopped calling, and I was single again. Like at the end of it, I'm like, well, single again. And it was a weird transition because I feel like so many people, and not to no one's fault, they hear, oh, you're cancer free. Oh my God, congratulations, get back to your life. But you don't have one to go back to. So which is sad because it's a loss and you grieve that loss. And I do remember when the hospital called me to tell me all my scans looked good, and there were like, they did this big needle biopsy, like, marathon on my tumor area, and they couldn't find anything, which was great. That was a nerve-wracking experience. But, I had a huge release of like not crying for almost a year after my first check-in to just like letting everything out. It was hideous. And excuse me. And after that, I was very private about it. I didn't tell anyone really anything. I posted a little thing on Facebook that was literally like, hey guys, by the way, I've disappeared, but I'm back now, and it's because I was dying, and here I am, and everything's fine. But from that point on, like, I mean, it was like being a newborn. I knew nothing. It was like I could barely get dressed, you know. Like there was like the physical depletion of like not being up to the same shape that I was in when I went in, but then there's also like, you know, your friend scape looks different, and in some cases, not mine, thankfully, but like in some cases, like your family scape looks different. And so, and I didn't have a job. I wasn't allowed to work. I wasn't well enough to work yet, so I had a period of time where I just was kind of floating about. And you have to figure out like where you fit with yourself, like, and I want to say again, but it's not again, it's a whole new thing. And so you deal with was like my, you know, I do musical theater, I'm not saving lives, like, you know, it was kind of like, do I want to do this? Does this feel good still? Like, what does this mean? Like, why do I want to do this? I'm not helping anyone. You know, I'm not contributing to the greater good of the world. And I have a little story about that for later, that that I do contribute to the greater good of the world. But it's a weird thing to kind of like figure out, because like you're not all good. There's a lot of mental gymnastics that goes around that, where you're like, I want to be good. I want to come out of this thinking like, oh, I have this new lease on life and how exciting that is for me. And maybe some little brain cell back in your chemo brain is thinking that, but on its face, you have nothing. Like, you look like crap and you're totally destroyed from the inside out. And it's just building again. And it's harder to do because you're weakened in every sense. So it's like building blocks of like, okay, I got out of bed this morning. Congratulations me. Okay, let's go outside and like take a walk and like try and make it farther than 10 blocks. Okay, I did that. Congratulations me. And it's just like little things like that you kind of build up. And I still think I have a lot of apprehensions around a lot of things now based on that. Like there's this tiny little violin of fear that is inside of me that stems from that. That's like, okay, well, you made it 10 blocks. So like, can you make it 15? Can you make it 20? And like now it's like, I can go miles and it's fine, but it's still, you hit a point where you're like, am I okay? Am I good? Am I good? Am I going to make it? Like, it's really weird. There's a lot of, you know, I guess PTSD, for lack of a better term, that stems from what you experience during treatment. And now, like with a lot of it in the rear view, I can look at it and have a good chuckle, you know, because it's like, you ridiculous human. Like, what were you thinking? But you know, I tried to date right away. That was terrible. Like, I still looked like a tortoise. Like, why? Why was I thinking that was a good option? You know, like, who is this bald?
No, I was just gonna say, people, I mean, I personally haven't been there, but just from, you know, seeing, it's like, as soon as you get that clear, I think, you know, the thought process is, okay, I'm better, I can get back to it, right? And even just like with my mom, it was, okay, yes, you got that clear, you're cancer free, but you know, the doctor continued to say, you know, it is going to take time before you're back at work 100%. It's going to take time before you're out doing all the things that you want to do, right? And especially in our society, it's almost like, okay, if nothing's actually wrong with you anymore, then what's the reason why you're not working? What's the reason why you're not out, right?
Right. Get back to the office.
Yeah. So that's, I think that's a hard one to switch off for anybody. Yeah.
Well, and I'd be curious to ask, like, in your mom's circumstance, like, what was her like end of treatment protocol? Like, did she have a stem cell transplant? Was it radiation? Like, what was her?
So she did like chemo, radiation, and then she had surgery. Or sorry, not in that order, but yes. And then afterwards, it was more like, you just, especially with that radiation, getting your energy back, right? Back to that 100% where you can actually work a full day, let alone 5 days in the
Yeah.
week.
Was she like full body radiation, or was it localized?
It was localized.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear such, and again, like that's such a good point too, that like treatment for different people is always different. Like I loved radiation. Like after I was supposed to do 8 rounds of chemo and 4 of them failed. Like every single one, the tumor went from like how big it was, that it shrank down, and then it grew right back after like 2 weeks.
Wow.
And watching that was wild. Like if you think bodies are weird, watch that come out of you. Like it was like an accordion. It was so weird. But then like radiation happened, and I like my hair was growing back, and like I felt energized, and my chemo brain went away, and I was like, oh my god, I can think and see clearly. And that is the reason why I questioned the hospital I was at to get a second opinion. But like I had more energy doing that than I did anything else. And then like you're saying, your mom didn't, and she like was trying to get her strength back from radiation, but mine was localized also. So it's just so person dependent.
Oh yeah.
That like putting this like idea of like, oh, when you have cancer it's always going to be like this, and it's just not true. I was told horror stories about my stem cell transplant, and none of it happened. Like I was told, like, you know, you're just going to have days where like you want to go to the bathroom and you're just not going to make it, and you just need to be okay with that and not be embarrassed about it. And that didn't happen once. Like not even close. And it's so different. Like listening to other people talk about their experiences is super interesting. And like to your question before, about what would I say to other people who are about to experience this? Like, I don't know. Like it's so different for every single person, that for me to be able to say like, oh, you know, when you go through chemo, you're going to, you know, smelling orange juice is going to make you want to throw up. Like that's not true for everyone.
Right.
Like high acidic foods made me throw up, so I avoided them. Sushi made me throw up. Found that out the hard way. You know, and every protocol is so different. Like I was injecting myself with hormones at night so that I could like generate stem cells for collection. And that kind of made me suddenly like that needle hit and I was like, bathroom time. But it's so different for every single person. It's hard to really just say like, this is what you should do. And then of course, like, you know, your mom's experience with radiation and my experience with radiation are so different. Even though it was the same thing, like localized radiation, like that's, you know, self-explanatory. But she was tired and I felt amazing. So like I was constipated and I had an issue at a gym once, but it was like, it's in the book, you know, it's graphic. I won't go there for you, but
hey, I think that's another thing. At that point, once you're on the other side, it's like nothing bothers you anymore.
Oh yeah.
You know, like people that you never would have thought may have had to help you through some really crazy times, that, you know, things have been coming out or whatever, right? And yeah, you just get to that point of, you know what, if this is the worst thing right now, I can handle that.
Right. Well, and it's like the facing your mortality plus all of like the bodily indecencies that happen to you either as a side effect or as a piece of treatment. And then after it's over, it's like, I don't care. Like, do your worst. Like, I always think in my head, like, I survived cancer, I will survive you. And, you know, because the bar is raised. Like, you're different. Like, your brain is different. You think differently. You become a different person. And it's like a really strange metamorphosis in a way. Because, like I said, like, you can't recognize the person that you were before. Like, you just aren't. And like, I think for a while, straight out, you know, when it was kind of trying to figure out again, like you know, your cancer is gone, go do your thing. Like I tried really hard to be the person I was before, and it just didn't work. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel comfortable. And like, to be fair, like the person I was before was like not the greatest. And, you know, kind of glad to be rid of a lot of him, but you know, here we are. You know, just not the nicest person you want to meet. He was hot. He was real hot, but like not the nicest person. So, you know, like it's just a weird discomfort of realizing that the person that got cancer is not the person that doesn't have it anymore. And like moving beyond that, and like in a way I wish I would have had this kind of like wonderment about it at the time, but it's exciting. Like you kind of get to scrap it, and like I think I had moments where I was like, do I stop talking to everyone and just become a whole new person? Like, do I leave the country and go live in like Prague somewhere as like an artist painting sides of buildings or something? Like my name's Enrique now. Like just figure like new identity, because it's a whole new identity, and it feels that way too. It's very strange. I don't know if your mom had like experienced that too, but like it's a weird jump board.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, I think for her it was more so like, people like just like that, not sweating the small stuff and like really realizing that, okay, this was important. Now I'm dealing with this. It's really not us, right? And yeah, just figuring out what do I want to do with the rest of my time, and things like that. I think that's a lot of like even just people that I've been around who have been sick and battled, do I really want to work 5 days a week, 40 hours, right? You do see a lot of people
Sure
who, when
don't.
they do, right? Do they come back to work and they're like, yeah, no, I don't want this.
Yeah.
Right. Because they realize, life is precious, as we all know, but sometimes that reality really.
Well, you need that contrast to kind of really make it make yourself understand it. But I think also, to be more in the present, like within the last 3 years, I think collectively we're all kind of realizing like, I don't want to work 5 days a week, 40 hours a week anymore. And, I think what I was saying before about facing your mortality and taking stock in what you want to do moving forward, like we all collectively experienced a global trauma and had a moment to sit down and be like, I think I'm good. And then trying to navigate your way out of the circumstances that kind of keep us beholden to that and figure out a way to not, it's like I've been kind of embattled by this for the last decade plus, and then to have it happen again, like when shutdown happened, I was like, I got this, I know exactly how to do this. And it wasn't hard. I made it fun. I had a great time. Like, can we do that once a year?
For a limited amount of time.
Yeah, just 30 days. 30 days, nothing's open, everyone's free. Like just like run around the neighborhood naked or something. I don't know. Like whatever you want to do. Just 30 days. Let us all reset. But it was like that I think is very, I guess, the most like common denominator example that I can give of like you go through something and on the other side of it you're different.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm curious. It sounds like you found this outlet in writing. Was that kind of a major shift for you, or did you eventually get back into theater? What kind of happened after?
Ooh, okay. The question. So I've been an artsy fartsy guy since I was a kid. Like I was always painting and writing and singing and composing and doing all kinds of nutty stuff. And it runs in the family. Like my sister's an opera singer, my aunt works on Broadway, my dad's a singer songwriter, my mom plays piano, my little sister sings. Like we all are in the circus in some way. And so I've always written, I've always been a writer, but not in the capacity that I was like, I'm gonna write a book. And I knew after I was like, cancer free, go live your life, I knew I did want to write something. And I didn't know if it was going to be for me and just me, and I wasn't going to put it anywhere. I didn't know if it was going to be a stage thing that like I put up at some like nightclub or something. I didn't know. And then I met some people who also were cancer survivors, and they said basically what we were just talking about. Like they got out of the hospital and they were told they were cancer free, and they were like, okay, what do I do now? And everyone around them was annoying them, and they didn't want to go to work, and they were like irritated with things that their friends were saying, and they were like, I don't want to hang out with you. Why do I feel this way? Because I know that I love you, but also I want to choke you. And it was just this conversation of like, who have I become? Like, what road am I on? And it was a light bulb moment where I was just like, this is the thing I'm writing. This is what I'm going to write about. And it's that very small window of from the time you're diagnosed to after you get past the finish line, the perceived finish line, and what you deal with. And I talk about, body dysmorphia and relationships and sex and dating and, drugs in a sense and drinking and, your relationship with all of those things throughout that process, and then after the fact, and how it changes, and like what you still adhere to, and you know, and how it affects your life. And that's why that happened. I never set out to be like, I'm gonna write a book. And I never like, that's never crossed my mind. Like, the idea of writing a book to me is so hysterical that, like, me, barely graduated high school and like ran away to New York to join the circus, was like, I'm gonna write a book. That's the right path for me. And here we are. Like, it's on Barnes and Noble. I'm very proud of it. Like, I used to sit in Barnes and Noble when I moved here and had like no money to do anything, and I'd sit there with my laptop and people watch and eat and have like the $1 coffee and just and like, now I have a book in it. And that just like, that's such a great full circle moment. But it was not a process I planned, and the timing of it was really interesting. I had a desk job at an arts club that didn't require much of me, and so for most of my shift I would just sit at the computer and write. So like, I always tell people I got paid to write a book, but it was really just because I was sitting at a desk at a job that I hated.
Hey, multitasking.
Writing a book.
Perfect.
For sure. Yeah.
Multitasking.
Yeah, and I did go back to theater. I spent 10 years after like being cancer free doing theater. Like, I worked everywhere, all over the country. And even to last year when I was doing the Chicago tour and was replaced at the last minute, like, that was not even 6 months ago. Well, I guess that was 6 months ago. But like, I think I'm done. Like, I think it's not a thing that serves me as it used to, but there's so many other exciting things that are happening because of this book now that, like, I kind of don't care. I'm good.
No, that's fair. And then I guess the question of all questions now, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but what are you doing today that's contributing to the greater good and, is really fulfilling for you at this point in time?
Well, if I may point back for one moment before I answer that fully.
For sure.
The idea that like doing theater at the time did not serve the greater good and wasn't like helping people in any way. There's a story that I tell in the book that it was like maybe a year or so after I had been out of the hospital, and I was feeling not great about doing auditions and like trying to get a job in a show to be like a circus creature, a show pony for a couple weeks and be paid to do it. And I just had feelings about it. And a friend of mine was like, hey, I have tickets to go see Newsies. Do you want to go? And I was like, you know what? I haven't seen a show since I got out of the hospital. I'll go. And they were free tickets, thank the Lord. And they were like 3rd row, house left, to see Newsies. And like, again, I don't know how versed you guys are on musical theater, but Newsies is quite a spectacle. I highly recommend it. The pro shot of the Broadway tour is on Netflix. So you can watch it. But I was just sitting there, and from the time the orchestra started at the top of the show until the end of curtain call, I just sat there and cried, like violently cried. My friend was like, what is wrong with you? And I'm sitting there like trying to muffle myself. And it just, I had this moment where I was like, oh, okay. Like, it doesn't feel this way when you're on stage because you're trying to do 100,000 things at once. But in every single audience that you're doing a show for, there is at least one person that is absolutely desperate for what you're doing for whatever reason. It doesn't have to be a life or death situation, but it is absorbing that art form in a way that is saving their life. And that could be a very small reason. And, one of my favorite stories, I was doing 7 Brides in Indiana. And I don't know if you know 7 Brides. Again, I don't know. We should have talked about this before. I don't know how familiar you are with the theater thing. But 7 Brides is about 7 brothers who live in the mountains, and they go down to the town and they kidnap 7 women to marry them. It was written in the 40s, like, cut it a break. But not the best storyline. But after our matinee, I got a message from this guy who was like, hey, I'm a teacher, and I brought my special needs kids to the show today, and one of my students wanted to tell you hi. And so I still, to this day, on my phone, have a picture of this teacher and his student Ebony, who had cerebral palsy, and she was just like waving at the camera, smiling. And it just was like, ah, yeah, that's why I do it. Because at one point I was in her position, not obviously multiple reasons, but like I needed to see that show for whatever reason.
Right.
And for her, like maybe she didn't have the cognizance to know why she needed to see the show, but it touched her in a way that she wanted to like say hello, and like she had that thought to take that action. And so like, sure, at the time it felt selfish, but in hindsight it was like, yeah, like that's what I needed. And it made me realize that like being a performer isn't just about a tick on your resume and show photos and videos of you doing the thing that you can be like, oh, look what I did. But also that like you're helping people who like feed their souls in a way that they can't get in any other way. And so that's the pointing back of that. The now version of that, I think, is just what I'm doing is I'm low-key, not so low-key, creating a musical TV show out of my book. And it's going like, I don't know if you've seen like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend or Zoe's Extended Playlist or Glee or anything like that, but it's going to be like that, where it talks about a very serious subject matter, but it's all like glamour and spotlights and fantasy world, centered around cancer. So that is my next contribution to the quote unquote greater good.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
So we've kind of alluded to it a little bit, but the book, Cancer in Musical Theater and Other Chronic Illnesses, again, can you just let us know where we can get it? Again, it's linked in the description. It's linked below this video. But for those who are maybe listening to this while they're walking, just so that it sinks in their head and they remember when they're done that walk or whatever they're doing, that workout, where to find you.
Oh my God, I hope you're not listening to this working out. I've probably derailed your I've derailed your cardio, and I'm not sorry. Yeah, so the book, Cancer Musical Theater and Other Chronic Illnesses, you can find it on AppleBooks, at Barnes & Noble. You know, there are others like Walmart and Amazon, but they're not the best companies. So Barnes & Noble is what I lead with. If you would like to give them money, I'd rather see that happen. Because my Barnes & Noble that I used to sit at closed. It was a Century 21 for a while, and then that closed. So, you know, they're dying out, but I love them. So give them money, because then I also get money.
Sounds good. Now, you know, it's funny if somebody was listening to this while they're working out, you know, at the very least they've had a lot of laughs and they probably burned some calories laughing. So that's
don't drop the weights on your face.
Yeah.
Honest to God, like biggest fear. Anytime I do a bench, it's like, okay, do not drop this on your face. I've seen people choke because of this.
Oh man.
Oh man. Now, one thing I always like to do as well is, you know, for those who are listening, who haven't gone through some of these experiences, I always like to have our guest, you know, take their hindsight and be able to help someone maybe apply it as their foresight. So if you had an opportunity to, you know, have a coffee, or maybe in your case, have a different type of beverage with Edward, you know, after you got that diagnosis.
I'm sober now, and I would tell him to hurry up and get the same.
Okay.
No, that's not my real answer, though. That's just a fact.
Okay, no, that's there you go. All right, but if you could, okay, so have a cup of water or a coffee with him. What would you say to him?
I mean, that's a totally different book in and of itself, right? Like, if I met that hot mess, like, I just don't even know. I'd slap him first, which he may or may not like. I don't really know. So I think the one thing that I would want to impress upon young me, oh my God, like there's so many things, right? Like we look back at pictures of ourselves and like we're just like, God, you were good looking. You just wasted all of that, didn't you? And I think I don't know. I mean, I definitely was really insecure and really apprehensive about saying and verbalizing and going for what I actually wanted. And so I think I would sit his big ass down and I would just be like, stop it. Like, it's okay to want big things. It's okay to like to say that like you want a Grammy or you want a Broadway show or you want a Tony or you want to work with these famous people, or like it's okay. Like we're so often shamed for that or made to feel a particular way about that. Like yeah, like I want this book to be a bestseller. I want the TV show to be on Hulu. I want, you know, Ryan Murphy to pick it up. And like I have a second script that I've written for Ryan Murphy that I would like him to pick up that stars Julianne Moore. But like, you know, I want the big things, and I'm only now at 36 years old comfortable enough in where I'm at in my life to say that. And I don't know if it's because I've been going through a lot of changes for my own life recently that I'm just like, nope, this is what we're doing. And I didn't do that as a kid. I thought I had all the time in the world and I had all of the elasticity in my skin in the world. And you don't. And so you know, I think it's either Meryl Streep or Glenn Close. They say something to the effect of like, beauty and youth are wasted on the young. And you know, I look at my 20-something-year-old self and that's just so true, you know, and I would just want to tell him like, stop it, like pick a focal point and run at it. You know, like all this other crap is like distraction, just like straight shoot right down the road. And, you know, you hear a lot of those adages like, you know, go for it and like, get out of your own way and blah, blah, blah. And we think we know what that means until we realize how in our way we are. And like, I would just physically move him, get out. Because, you know, he was young and dumb, and as we all were at one point. You know, I'm certainly not an isolated incident here. I'm not special. But yeah, I think that's it. I think that's what I would say to him.
All right, fair enough. Well, Edward, thank you so much for making the time and sharing this. I think if nothing else, somebody who listened to this because of the title is going to definitely be encouraged after this.
I hope so, if they haven't dropped their weights on their face.
Oh, man.
Well, awesome. Edward, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for making this fun. And for everyone who watched or listened, thank you for letting us disrupt your everyday.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.